Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss about the process of election in United States of America. As you all know that Donald Trump has been inaugurated as the 47th president of USA and JD Vance has been elected as the 50th vice president. So let us try to understand what this entire process of election had been in United States of America, which we should divide into a number of phases so as to understand it properly, because the entire process is quite complicated. And before that, let's look at also what are the constitutional requirements for the position of the post of the president. The person who is to get elected as the president, the qualification is that he should be a natural born citizen of United States of America. He should be 35 years of age, and that he should have been a resident of US for 14 years. These are broad requirements for the position. And then along with that, by the 42nd Amendment Act, it has been added that no person can acquire the position of president for more than 2 terms. This was not there in the original constitution, though George Washington had set up certain conventions or precedents related to this, and he did not seek re-election after he completed his 2 terms. Most of the US presidents, they followed this convention. In fact, many presidents have been there who were elected for 2 terms and 2 consecutive terms also. You know that Donald Trump is the second president who has been elected as the president second time in a non-consecutive term, right? The first one was Grover Cleveland. So mostly the president, they do not seek re-election. Only Franklin D. Roosevelt was the only president who was elected for the 3rd and the 4th term as well under certain situations, but this amendment came afterwards. So let us first of all, we will look at the overall steps of the process of elections, broadly speaking. Let us try to understand that major phases which are there in the process of election. And once we get this framework, then we will get into the details of each of these phases as far as the process is concerned. So let's see this. First and foremost, there will be announcement by the candidates that they are running for the elections and the registration. When does this happen? This thing happens somewhere in the spring of the year before the election year. Like for example, if the election is to happen, the final election is to happen in 2024, then in 2023 itself the process will start. So the candidates in the spring, that means somewhere around March or April, they will be announcing their candidacy from the parties wherever they want to get elected. But a number of candidates will be there in the fray, and they are going to register themselves, and they will then start their campaign. Okay, and this campaign will be mostly from the summer of the previous years, let's say around May 2023 until the spring of the election year, around again March or April of 2024. So this campaign would go on, and after the campaign, then there will be the first, we say that this is the first major step in the process of election where the parties will decide their candidates. And when the parties are deciding, this also happens in 2 phases. First and foremost, there will be primary or caucus taking place. Primary or caucus is the first step where the parties are picking up the candidate, and they are finalized in the national conventions of the party. So there are 2 steps through which the parties, they are finalizing their candidate. Now when we say party over here, what we mean that the major political party, that is the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, they finalize their candidates through this process. Other minor political parties, they may decide their candidates by some other process also. It is not necessary that they will be holding the national convention. So the first step is the primary or the caucus, and the second step would be the conduct of a national convention. Both the parties will be separately conducting these affairs so as to finalize their candidate. So what happens in the primary and the caucus, that we will see in detail afterwards. Right now we are just looking at the steps which are there in the US presidential election. This happens from January to June of the election year. This will be where I mentioned that the states, they are, and also the parties, they are electing their candidates. Now because the primary and the caucus, it is happening at the state level. Every state will organize its own primary or caucus. So what happens, the parties will be organizing their local meetings over there. So there is a difference between primary and the caucus also. Each of the state will either conduct primary or they will conduct the caucus. Most of the states have now started to conduct the primaries to pick up their initial candidates. and few states they also conduct the caucus. The difference is that the primary is more formal process and caucus is more informal process. In the formal process of the primary, actual election takes place, and this is conducted mostly by the state governments itself. They will organize the election for the primaries of the parties, and then the people will come and they will be deciding their candidates on the basis of the vote. Whereas in the caucus, what happens, it's an informal process. There's no polling station as such over there. Rather, caucus will be the local meetings of the party, where the delegates or members of the party will come together, and through different processes they will be finalizing their initial candidates. So either in the state the primary will happen or the caucus will take place. But primary is more evolved process now, so most of the states they have converted from caucus to primary. So larger number of states they are conducting the primary now. So this is why we say that because it is happening at the state level and the parties are deciding upon their election candidates, so we say that this is the states and parties, they are electing their candidates. And this is, as I told you, to be finalized in the second step, which we call as the National Convention. So this happens from January to June every election year. This will be followed by the national conventions, which of both the parties, the Democratic Party, of which the symbols donkey, and the Republican, the elephant. This happens somewhere in July to early September of the election year. So that means in 2024, July to early September, last time the national conventions of the parties happen, and this most of the videos of the leaders also becoming viral of giving their speeches in these national conventions. So the very popular speeches are given in these national conventions. So in the national conventions, the delegates which have been sent, now how the delegates will be sent from primary and caucus, that I will tell you in detail afterward. We are just looking at this broad step. In the national convention, the parties basically are finalizing their candidates, who's going to be their nominee for the election. So Republican Party will finalize one candidate, and the Democratic Party will also finalize one candidate who will run for the presidential election. And each of these persons who are the presidential nominees in the national convention itself, they are going to pick up the vice presidential candidate also. So parties will choose their presidential candidates. This national conventions will be followed by the presidential debates. So two major candidates will now get into the debates, which again are very popular, and we see most of these debates happening between in September and October of the election year. And this would be followed by the general election. You can say this is the next phase. In the general election, the people are going to vote, but people are voting for the candidate. Please mind that people are voting for the candidate, but people are not deciding finally the candidate, because on this vote itself, the final result will not be declared. The final result will be declared on the basis of the electoral college voting. That means the people who are giving their votes in the general election in a particular state, on the basis of the votes which have been given by the people to the candidates, the candidate will be allocated some number of electors from that state, of which again we are going to see the process in detail. So in the general election, which happens on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, right? This is the fixed convention that after the first Monday, the first Tuesday which will come, on that the general election will happen, and the people from all across different states, people are going to give their vote. This will be followed by the voting of the electoral college. Once the people have voted, as I told you, that depending upon the votes which have been given to the candidates, every state is going to pick up electors, which will form the electoral college. So in the electoral college, there are going to be electors from different states based upon how people have voted in the general election. This electoral college, which includes the members of electors from all the states, is finally going to again give the vote, which usually happens in December. And this voting which has been done by the electoral college, on this voting finally the candidate is elected. Generally what happens is whatever vote has been given in the general election, many a times it is very clear that the number of electors which have been picked up for a particular candidate are so large that they are easily going to win the election, right? So it becomes very clear in the general election itself. Many a times it becomes like this year also, you see, in the general election, it was itself very clear that which candidate is going to win, right? Because seldom it happens that the electoral college will vote against how the voting was done in the general election. And that also very few of them can actually vote against or contrary to how it had happened before. So the votes of electoral college are given. These votes will be then counted by the Congress. Congress will assemble to count these votes, which happens on 6th of January. And on the basis of these votes, finally, the president is elected and who is inaugurated on the 20th of January. So this is the broad process. I am just repeating this process overall once again, that let's divide it into phases. First phase will be of the announcing the candidacy, and then the campaign will be there. The second phase will include the parties are finalizing their candidate. In this also there are two steps. First is the conduct of the primary or the caucus. Some states conduct caucus. Most of the states conduct primary. Primary is more evolved process. Primary is more formal. And based upon this primary and caucus, then the national convention takes place, which finally decides upon the candidates. And after the national convention, which is perhaps this is the completion of the selection of the candidates by the parties, then after that we have the general election which takes place. And of course, before the general election, there will be debate also, the presidential debate. And after general election, there will be voting by the Electoral College. And finally, the vote will be counted, the president will be elected. So that's the broad process. Now let us look at in a little more detail to understand this process, the announcement, registration and the campaign. As I told you, the announcement, it happens in the spring of the year before election, somewhere around March, April, then summer of the previous years. That means somewhere around, let's say 2023, May, June and all. The campaign will start, which will continue till next year spring. And any candidate who has this, these are certain conditions which are followed, that any candidate who has raised around $50,000 or more, right, in their campaign, then they need to register with the Federal Election Commission, right? And after they have registered with the Federal Election Commission, they also need to name a campaign committee, right? Their panel will be appointed, which will register as to overall expenditure and everything. And they are going to raise the fund and spend for their campaign. So this is how, so it's a brief formal process which the candidates have to follow as far as their campaign is concerned. The second step will be the conduct of the primary and the caucus. As I told you, it happens between January and June of the election year. National delegates, the election of delegates for the national convention. So what is the purpose of the primary or caucus? Let's try to understand a little more detail, that the purpose of the primary or caucus is not to finalize the candidates, right? The candidate will be finalized in the national convention. So what the primary and caucus do is that they will do some kind of voting, or some process will be there in the caucus by which they will decide as to how many supporter a particular candidate is getting, right, based upon the number of votes. And there will be of course different proposition in different states. It varies from state to state. Based upon the votes which have been given to a candidate, on that basis the number of delegates are allocated to that particular candidate. So these delegates are going to represent that candidate in the national convention. So if a particular candidate gets a lot of vote in all the states, then most of the delegates which are going into the national convention are going to support that candidate. That means that candidate, it becomes more or less clear that this candidate is likely to be finalized as the party's nominee. So the purpose of primary or the caucus is to pick up the delegates, right? These delegates are going to represent the candidate. So here we say this process will vary from state to state. It is a little complicated process where we will see that how it is decided. We will look into the option also. There are two major ways, as I told you, primary or the caucus. You already know this. Primary or caucus themselves can be open, closed or hybrid. So primary can also be open or closed or hybrid, or caucus can be open, closed or hybrid. What does this mean? An open primary is the one where the person is, of course, depending upon the state, where the person is any member who's participating in these. These are the normal, people who are participating. So in open primary or caucus, they are not required to register with the political party. They are not members of any political party, and they are just free to vote any which way, right? So they are not affiliated to any of the party. They are free to vote. In some of the states in some states they conduct closed primary or caucus. Here the voters or the people or those people who are participating in the primary or caucus, those who are participating, they need to register themselves with the political parties. And closed one will be where howsoever you have registered with whatever political party, you have to give the vote according to that. There may be hybrid also, wherein there may be a necessity of registering, but it is not necessary for you to vote to that particular party. Still you may be free to vote. So there can be a mix of both. So some states will have an open type of primary or caucus, where those who are participating are free to vote for any of the party. Few states will be having closed system, where they will have to vote according to their registration with the political party. Hybrid is a mix of both. So this will vary from state to state. Let us now first talk about caucus. What caucus is like, the process, as I told you, it's an informal process, a system of local gatherings. Caucus is a system of local gatherings where the meetings are run by the political parties. The political parties themselves, that's why it becomes informal. Political parties themselves are running the meetings at the local level, which could be district level, precinct level, okay, or the county level. And in these meetings themselves, they are deciding, either they will decide by a secret ballot, or they will decide by making a group. In the meeting itself, they will create a group they will say that, okay, how many people are supporting this particular candidate and how many people are supporting this particular candidate or the third candidate. So depending upon the group, they will count and they will see who gets how much of vote or support. There can be some opinion surveys also conducted before this caucus meeting, and on that basis also they can take a decision, the caucus meetings. Number of delegates which are given, they are on the basis of vote or the support. As I told you that they are giving the vote or they are deciding in favor of the candidate. But the purpose of primary or caucus is to allocate delegates to the candidate, and these delegates will represent the candidate in the national convention, because the candidate is going to be finalized in the national convention. Now let's look at the primary. Primary is more formal process, right? In the primary, where it's happening in most of the states now, the elections are run by the state or the local governments. That's why it becomes more formal process, and here proper voting will take place always. So the party members, they will vote for the best candidate. Now when we say party members, it could be that they are not affiliated to party also, right? As I told you, it could be open primary also. So you can say just the members, they vote for the best candidate, and through a system of secret ballot, and award delegates to the winner on the basis of votes. As much of vote a candidate is getting, on that basis the number of delegates is allocated. But there is a variation in this also. So from state to state it is varying. In some cases the winner takes all. That means the person who gets most number of votes in that particular primary of that state or the caucus, this we are talking about primary basically. So in the primary, number of votes which a particular candidate is getting, based upon that much of vote, all the delegates are allocated from that state to this particular candidate. So this is what we say is the winner takes all, or it could be proportional representation. Suppose there are 3 candidates and the people have voted. The first candidate has got 40%, the third 30%, and the another one 30%. So that means 40% of the delegate will be, representing this candidate, 30% the second, and 30% the third. So depending upon the proportion of vote, the delegates are allocated. The third one is the top 2 candidates. Out of whatever candidates are in the fray, the maximum vote of the top 2 candidates are taken up, and in proportion of how much votes they have got in relation to each other, they are allocated delegates. The third is the threshold votes. They will say that, okay, people who have got this much, above this much of votes, they will be getting the delegates, and then again based upon proportional representation. So there can be different ways how the delegates are allocated by the primary for the candidates. These delegates will represent the candidates in the national conventions. There the candidate will be finalized for the party. I hope that's clear. Number of delegates from states depends upon the population of the states. So bigger states like California or Texas or Florida, they will have more number of people or the delegate who are participating in the national convention. So it depends on the population. The delegates, of course, are decided by the party itself. Party itself will decide as to which delegates are going to be there supporting the candidates. Now, next will be the national convention. Again, the 2 parties, major parties, they are organizing their national convention separately. Okay. So herein we have this taking place in July and August, where a lot of speeches and all is given. The parties are here to finalize their presidential candidate on the basis of the caucus or primary. We know this. Delegates are awarded for national convention. We are clear about this. And this is also following some complex set of rules. Okay. We will see that what rules it is following and how this entire process is taken up and decision is taken, and this rules are also varying from state to state. Delegates mostly party, that means the delegates which have come from the state, we have already seen this before, no, in the previous slide itself, that it varies from state to state. Delegates which are there, they are mostly, I told you, are party members, right? They are leaders of the party, or they may be early supporters of the candidates also, though those can be delegates, but it's again finalized by the party. Number of delegates is of course based upon the votes which have been given to the candidate. So they are going to represent their state at the national party convention. This is how the national convention people will reach in the national convention. At the national convention, this I have already told you that each party is holding it, and they are selecting a final presidential nominee, and the presidential nominee, once he gets nominated, he will pick up a candidate who will run for vice presidential position also. So this will also happen at the national convention. Now in the national convention, we have two types of delegates. Those delegates which have been sent from the primary or caucus, those delegates are called as pledged delegates, because they are representing those particular candidates. Either the winner is taking all or proportional representation. So this is how the delegates have been allocated from that particular state to the candidates. So these are pledged delegates, means they are going to vote in according to the candidates they are representing, right? Apart from the pledged delegates, there may be non-pledged delegates also, which the party itself is sending at the national convention. So there are pledged delegates, those who have been picked up from the state level and they are going to the national convention, and there are unpledged delegates also which are reaching to the national convention. So the pledged delegates, they are expected to endorse the candidate that voters have chosen, right? According to that, they were picked up. And then there are unpledged or unbound delegates. These people are called as unpledged or unbound delegates in the Republican Party, but they are called as super delegates in the Democratic Party. The name is different. And these people are free to support any candidate. So those pledged are going to support the candidate which were picked up in the primary caucus according to the votes. And here the non-pledged, unpledged delegates, they are free to vote as per their choice. So what happens here is that most of the time it becomes very clear as to if a particular candidate or is getting overwhelming number of delegates or the pledged delegates from different states, then it will be very clear as to that this person is going to be finalized in the national convention. Then the convention becomes non-contested, right? So it's very clear. But in case if it is not very clear as to which candidate is going to be finalized, then it becomes a contested. It becomes a contested convention. In the contested convention, both, whenever it is contested, means obviously it will be finalized on the basis of final voting, right? So here the pledged candidate will participate as well as the unpledged candidates will also be giving their vote in the national convention. But there is a slight difference in terms of party. In case of Democratic Party, in the first round, generally the super delegates, they will not vote if the contest is if the convention is contested convention. If it is non-contested, means it is very clear which candidate is winning, then the pledged and non-pledged both will vote in both the parties. But if it happens to be contested convention, means it's not very clear and the contest has to take place. In that case, in Republican Party, pledged and unpledged both will vote. But in case of Democratic Party, they according to their rules, if it is contested, then in that case, in the first round of voting, the super delegates will not be voting. The pledged delegates will be voting, right? So this is a contested convention where it is not clear. So voting will take place. And in this voting, again, if it is not clear as to, that means a particular candidate doesn't get majority, even in the first round of the national convention voting, then the second and the third other rounds will take place. But after the first round, what happens is that the pledged candidates, they are set free. Okay, that means in the second round, the pledged are set free, means they can vote for any of the candidate, and unpledged are anyhow free to vote. So in the second round, all of them can vote for any of the candidate, and this is what is called as a brokered convention, right? When the second round, when everyone is free to vote for any of the candidate, even the pledged delegates are free, this is called as a brokered convention. So if in the first round, generally in the first round itself, the decision is taken up. So mostly it is contested, contested convention, whereby voting in the first round, in the national convention it is clear as to who is going to be the nominee of the party. But if it is not, then the second round will take place. In that case, the pledged candidates will be freed. They can vote for anyone, and this convention, it is now called as brokered convention. In the brokered convention, again there will be a lot of lobbying and pressure will act, right? A lot of people will come and give their speeches. There will be support declared for some or the other candidate and all that, and on that basis second round of voting will take place. If in the second round also no one is getting, then the third round and the fourth round, as on, the number of voting phases will happen after that, and in between then they will try to influence the members as to vote in a different way altogether. So ultimately they will decide one of the candidates to be finalized. So if no candidate gets the majority, as I told you earlier itself, then convention delegates choose the nominee. Right? That means convention delegates choose the nominee means what it becomes? It becomes the brokered convention. And additional voting rounds will take place, and this is how the party will finalize the candidate. After the candidate has been finalized from both the parties, major parties, the minor parties, they will decide by petitions and all, they will be finalizing their candidates, whosoever will be there. We are not worried about that. After the candidates have been finalized, then these people are going to be starting their campaign, and the presidential debates and all will take place, and then of course there will be general election. General election that happens in which people are voting all across the states. This happens on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, as I told you, and they do not, I told you that the people are not directly, they are giving the vote directly to the candidate, but they are not electing the candidate. Okay, they do not directly elect president. Rather what they do, whatever votes they have given, votes they are giving to the candidate itself. So on the ballot paper, the name of the candidate will be there. These candidate, the vote you are giving to them, but then they are not finalized on the basis of this vote. Rather, based upon the number of votes which a candidate will get, based upon that they will be allocated the electors from the state. What happens is that, let's talk about at a particular state, the people have voted, okay, and after the vote, one candidate has got a majority of the votes. So most of the states, what they have done is that the winner takes all the electors from the state. Most of the states, that means 48 states in US and Washington DC. What happens there is that the winner takes all the electors. That means the person who wins the election in that state, he will be given all the electors of the state. And who are the electors are separately decided. Electors are representing the votes of the people in the electoral college. So person who wins the votes, he is given all the electoral votes of that particular state. But there are two exceptions, Nebraska and Maine, where it is not the winner takes all situation. Here in that case, the electors are allocated based upon the proportion of votes which the candidate is getting, right? So if Republican candidate gets 40% of the vote and Democratic candidate gets 60% of the vote, that means the 60% of the electors from that state will be the Democratic Party, and 40% will represent the Republican Party. And in other states, those who has got the majority gets all the electors from that particular state. So most of the states are like this. So people have given their vote on the basis of that vote is for electing the electoral college. That means on the basis of that vote, they are picking up the electors from the state. Now, who is going to be the elector? People are giving their vote to the candidate. Separately, the party has decided the electors from that state, and the number of electors from one state, it will be equal to the overall representation of that state in the US Congress. So based upon the representation in the Congress, the number of electors are there in the state. These electors will be picked up by the party separately. The party will decide this in the state party convention or in the committee of the state party, howsoever it can decide, which will again vary from state to state. These electors are going to represent that state in the electoral college. Okay, and how the electors have been picked up? They have been picked up based upon the votes given in the general election to a particular candidate. So the candidate who has won most number of votes, that candidate will get all the electors from that particular state, or that party will get all the electors from that particular state. The electors are decided by the party. Exception is only 2 states I told you, where it is on proportional basis. Okay, so this is how the votes have been given to the candidate. Okay, and then each state will have a state of electors. Votes are given to the candidate, but it is actually electing the electoral college, right? So winner of that person who wins, he will get all the electors from that particular state. I have made this very clear. So each state has a slate of electors. Overall, decided winner takes all, right? Except for 2 states. Number of electors in the electoral college in states is based on the representation in the Congress. I've already told you this. An electoral college will later on vote for the president. So the next step will be the voting of the electoral college. So electoral college basically is going to give this vote somewhere in the on the first Tuesday after the second Wednesday in December. And the electoral college voting is also taking place in the state itself, where all the electorates are in the electoral college in that particular state, they are going to give their vote. So this becomes more or less a formality, right? It can happen that the people who have been elected in the electoral college, right, they vote contrary to the previously voted. It happens, but it rarely happens. And some of the states, in fact, even have made certain rules regarding this, and they can give punishment also to the electors if they are not voting according to the party whom they are representing. Okay, but still there may be, so there have been certain exceptions over here also, that the electors who have been chosen, they are not voting according to the way they were voted, the people have voted earlier. So in that case, there may be some exceptions. And one more thing, the electoral college voting which is happening, and the people who have voted, the votes given by the people, they are called as a popular vote, right? It may happen that a particular candidate has got more popular vote overall in all the states, right? But when it comes to the numbers of members in the electoral college, then the other candidate may be having the majority. So in the electoral college, some other candidate may win. So it happens that sometimes it happens that the person who has lost the popular vote overall actually wins the election. This is what happened in the year 2016 when Donald Trump had won. Popular votes, most of it had gone to Hillary Clinton. And something similar happened also in the 2000 election of US when Mr. Al Gore has got more number of popular votes, and George Bush had got lesser number. Still, George Bush was elected as the president in the electoral college voting. So first Tuesday after the second Wednesday in December, and thereafter the electors cast their vote in the respective states for president as also for the vice president, as I told you, and each elector casts one vote. Total electors in overall from all the states, this figure you must be knowing also, is 538. So how many votes they require in the electoral college? 270. So in the general election itself, that means in the Tuesday, in the first Tuesday after first Monday in November, when the voting of general election takes place, mostly then only it becomes clear as to how many electors have been allocated by states to a particular candidate. So it becomes clear that they will win the election. Only when there's a very close fight, then the electoral college voting, it becomes a little more important. So the candidate requires 270 votes out of these 538, and this 538 figure, how this has come? By adding the representation of all the states. This is how the states are represented in the Congress. So based upon that only, the number of electors are coming from all the states. Overall it is 538. So the candidate has to get 270. Then the counting of the electoral votes will take place by the Congress in the joint session on the 6th of January, right? And on the basis of the counting, the result will be declared. But if no candidate still gets the majority, even after the electoral college voting, there may be more than one person in the fray, and if it is divided sometime, then in that case, because now the contest has become very strong in between two parties, right? But in the evolutionary phase of the political parties in United States of America, this wasn't the case. So sometime there may be more than two candidates also in the fray. So if a candidate is not getting proper majority, that means 50% of the votes, then in that case what happens? The final voting is taken up by the House of Representatives. Okay, final voting will take place by the House of Representatives. So I will just mention about this. If no candidate wins majority, then voting by the House of Representatives, and on that basis, the newly elected, either through House of Representative or through the Electoral College counting itself, the final president is elected, vice president is elected, and they are inaugurated on 20th of January. So this is all about the overall process of US election. Is quite complicated, but remember to divide it into various phases to understand it. Thank you so much.